many hurdles by the society. So we are remembering three important personality along with uh, Bhima Bhoi. So welcome to Swadesha Chakra talk on the very topic significance of the idea of Bhima Bhoi. So let's start today's session with an invocation of a song. So let me just share the screen. Thank you. Thank you so much for your kind attention. I, Randhir Kumar Gautam, welcome to you. So there's a Chakra talk on the very topic, significance of idea of Bhima Bhoi. Dear and respected friend, this lecture is being co-nurtured by School of Humanities and Social Science of Raffles University and Vishwaneedam Center for Asian Blossoming, Puducherry and Chennai. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome the guests who are virtually present here. I welcome Professor Tapan R. Mohanty, Dean, Department of Distance Education, National Law Institute, University of Bhopal. I welcome Professor Anant Kumar Giri from Madras Institute of Development Studies. I welcome Ms. Minati Pradhanji, creative writer, poetess from Bengaluru. Dr. Devendra Kumar Tiwari from lovely professional university, and many others friends who are virtually present here. Uh, Let me give a kind of brief introduction to Professor Mohanty. Dr. Tapan R. Mohanty is uh, Dean, Distance Education Department Center Professor of Sociology of Law. During the last few years, he has worked extensively in the areas of globalization, tribal development, and cultures of um, cosmo consumptions. Besides sociology of law, he had four major research projects to his credit on diverse issues like education management, Bhopal gas tragedy, engendering criminal law, and implementation of PC PNDT Act. He has more than 60 research articles to his credit, published in international and national referred journals such as Curriculum and Teaching, Economic and Political Weekly, Vikalpa, to name a few. He is also a recipient of Erasmus Mundus Fellowship from the European Union. A widely traveled intellectual, he has visited around 12 countries spread across four continents. He is an occasional writer in leading English dailies of the countries and also considerable exposure to electronic media as a subject expert on various social and educational issues. Thank you so much, sir, for accepting our invitation. Let me give a brief introduction to our Swadhyaya Chakra circle. Swadhyaya Chakra Co-Learning Circle of Self and Mutual Studies is an initiative of studying and learning together self, culture, societies, and the world. Friends associated with this are eager to walk and mediate with new horizons of thinking and new movements of social cultural change at work in our contemporary world. We study seekers such as Sri Aurobindo, Mahatma Gandhi, Chittaranjan Das, a creative thinker from Orissa, and many others from around the world. We also present our own writings and reflect upon our creativity together. We also invite seekers from different fields of life to share with us their life's vision, sadhana, and struggle for creating a world of beauty, dignity, and dialogue. We meet every Sunday or sometimes on Wednesday. We are now nurturing this dialogue in collaboration with the School of Humanities and Social Science of Raffles University. Today, we are going to understand the idea of Bhima Bhoi, particularly lessons from his idea of collective bhakti. And Bhima Bhoi was a great poet as well as philosopher of a good philosopher of Mahima Dharma. He inculcated or celebrated the path of bhakti, which is considered to be the heart of religion. His poems and songs are manifestation of love, passion, joy, and inspiration. And his songs or poems have also liberating and emancipatory connotation from societal hierarchy, sectoral rivalries, and Sanskritic hegemony. With this brief introduction, now I would like to invite Professor Anant Kumar Giri sir to kindly moderate today's session.
So, hello Randhir.
Yes, yes.
Hello Randhir and friends. So, it is a joy to join us from this place here. And I am standing on the top of a friend's home here in this village. Um, and then there is an integral school here. So, as we are opening ourselves to this invitation this evening, and as the sun is just setting down, so it reminds us of the wandering Alex, the Alek yogis. In the last conversation, Minati, who is joining us as a discussant, she was telling us about her experience of being with this wandering, and then with a particular dress and having food at a particular time. So, in this twilight moment, we are thinking about the relevance of Bhima Bhoi. But how do we think about relevance? The, the whole theme of relevance is related to relationship because sometimes we might have a view of relevance which is externally determined, like social relevance of something, and these yardsticks of relevance now have to be opened up to varieties of movements and consciousness of relationship. Then with the ideas of Bhima Bhoi, one of the heart-touching lines of Bhima Bhoi is ପ୍ରାଣୀଙ୍କ ଆରତ ଦୁଃଖ ଅପ୍ରମିତ ଦେଖୁ ଦେଖୁ କେବା ସହୁ ମଜୀବନ ପଛେ ନର୍କେ ପଡ଼ିଥାଉ ଜଗତ ଉଦ୍ଧାର ହେଉ. So one important challenge for us here is Praninka Arata, the suffering of Prani. But the suffering of Prani does not mean human beings alone. And so this is an important challenge that Bhima Bhoi is posing us today, because when we are talking about Arata, most of the time we are limiting Arata only to our own Arata. If I am an individual and if my loved person has not smiled with me today, then I think that my life is full of arata and the sky is falling down as London Bridge is falling down. Now, this very narrow view of arata, when it is limited to self in a very narrow sense, is not the only meaning of arata. Arata includes all of us and especially the vulnerable ones. So there is suffering. In fact, according to Viktor Frankl, man the sufferer, we are suffering, but we are not suffering in the same way. As Tolstoy is writing, that all happy families are happy in a similar way, and all unhappy families are happy in different ways. But the point is, are all happy families happy in the same way? So, suffering, the arata, that is with each one of us, there is a differential suffering. So, and here we would have to pay emphasis to the suffering of the most vulnerable. And who are the most vulnerable? For example, the tribal people in contemporary India, the Dalits, the women. And so when we are talking about pranika arata, with the universalizability of the challenge of dukkha or suffering, we are challenged to relate to the suffering of the vulnerable. And in this, the most vulnerable also, the one who cannot speak, the non-human animals, the nature. So in establishing relationship with Bhima Bhoi's thought, and not just thinking about an external yardstick of relevance. So we would have to think of the arata in this way, the suffering in this way, that how suffering today is a challenge for us to go beyond our narrow conception of suffering. And secondly, anthropocentric conception of suffering, and then use arata as an invitation for us to establish waves of relationships. Because only when we establish creative relationships, though Bhima Bhoi has said that ମୋ ଜୀବନ ପଛେ ନର୍କେ ପଡ଼ିଥାଉ, let my life go to hell. But going to hell does not necessarily make the life of others better. So, thinking with Bhima Bhoi, we can think that as we create waves of creative relationships, then we create seeds which would help us to overcome suffering. So, that is the challenge that Bhima Bhoi is posing us. Then the other thing is that how do we establish the bridge between arata and ananda, the suffering and joy? Because only when we take a step towards transformation of suffering, we create ananda for self and society and the world. So, arata and ananda, we would have to work and meditate together. And as we do that, there is one suggestion here in this set of thoughts, that is, dekhu dekhu keba sahu. Who can really tolerate all this? So here is the poetics of resistance, the spirituality of resistance, the link between love and resistance. Only when we resist the contemporary production of suffering, as we know, the people who are inspired by Bhima Bhoi, they went and they tried to enter inside Jagannath temple. They protested against the caste system. They were not just mute spectators. So therefore, the way of transformation of suffering is resistance. So we would have to bring poetry, philosophy, love, and resistance together. So, with this little offering from this wandering space under the open sky, so it is a joy for me to join this beautiful space that Randhir has created today, and invite Professor Tapan Mohanty. And as I am on the road, so let me request Randhir to please nurture the unfolding conversation. And towards the end, if the sky smiles, so with your generosity, I would join in.
Sure, sir.
Sure, sir.
Now, Professor Mohanty, sir, you are invited to deliver your talk.
Okay. So, thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, thank you very much, Randhir, and thank you to Anandavai and all the people who are present here to discuss and know about the contributions of Bhima Bhoi in today's context. Both Professor Ananta and Randhir has given created a platform from where I should take this discussion on. And my sincere thanks to them, because they had, without the underlying assumptions and the creativity and explanation, it would have been actually difficult to put the quintessential contributions of Bhima Bhoi in today's context and in today's lecture. So let me go some step by step to say about how we perceive today the contributions of Bhima Bhoi. Bhima Bhoi as a personality, and Bhima Bhoi's a contribution to the religion, to philosophy, to the day-to-day life, and understanding of society and polity and culture in general. There have been many write-ups, and if in fact go through as today, all of us for any idea, for any interest, we go to Wikipedia or things. So you can Google search, you can find Bhima Bhoi's connections, his Mahima Dharma, his writings, his the songs that he the song, and all this is available. And when we study about this, sometimes I was thinking, culture that Randhir and Ananta has created through this association, through this Swadesh Alotana Chakra, or what you call about this blossoming of these ideas. This is a very nice step, to develop an inclusive understanding of Indian philosophy and culture and literature. So within this paradigm, these structures, when I was thinking, I was asked by Randhir, sir, could you deliver that lecture in Bhima Bhoi and probably highlight us, no, explain us some of his significant contributions. Now, I in fact was told him that Randhir, I do not hold a degree in his work, research, but I have only passingly gone through, understood him primarily as a sociologist, of course, as an Odia, and somebody who has a deep, interest in the philosophical and religious tradition of India. So I hurriedly said him yes, and then I said, okay, I have to look back my old books which I studied and then understood, and then have to put into perspective. Some of the perspectives I can say about today, people would say Bhima Bhoi is important because he also happened to be, broader concept. You could say the Dalit scholar or the tribal scholar. Somebody would say no, can also look at a subaltern perspective. And when I say subaltern perspective, it is also an way of explaining things, saying that who are in the, or you can say he is an exponent of margin of marginal culture, and therefore understanding him, realizing his his capabilities, and the dynamics of his discourse is significant if you take from a perspective of subalternism. But I don't think that Bhima Bhoi as a personality can be clubbed or can be confined to the identity as a tribal, to the identity as a Dalit, to the identities as a marginal. Rather, it is time, who had, in fact, long time, we have brought Bhima Bhoi from the margin to the main line. So bringing him from margin to main line means that look at the lucidity and simplicity of his culture. And secondly, if you look at a literary perspective also, there are a lot of people who are shown interest in the literary dimension of, because as a student of sociology, so when I studied, some people say that there is a dimension of sociology of literature, because how does literature look at it, society? And in fact, when you define literature, people say literature is the reflection of society. So if you look at study the literature that has been produced by Bhima Bhoi and his followers, it also provides us a perspective to look into uh, both the travels and troubles of the time and the capacity to go beyond them, nurturing human potentiality. So any whether you take from literary, in fact, I must say that some of the Bhima Bhoi's poems and poetry and contributions are very rich in as a Oriya poetic tradition, not merely a Bhakti tradition. So that's another understanding. Then the third and most important point is that can we look at Bhima Bhoi as a saint, as a Bhakti cult, as some and from the Bhakti tradition? Now, that is something very interesting one, because when we talk about bhakti as a tradition, what do we find? We find again there is, if I can say, there are two distinct parts. One, we can say people like Mirabai, you can think about, and sometimes I say in my lectures that I consider Mirabai was as one of the first feminists of the world, because who could took the world on her shoulder and the challenges of it and get out from her home, even though it is transcending bhakti, but it was also a way of avoiding social restrictions on women. So I even find Sri Chaitanya, a Brahmin, no? A Chaitanya. So when I look at Chaitanya, when I look at this, and then also another tradition where you find the poet saints or bhakti traditions comes to people like Tulsidas. And, and then thirdly, you find within them the people like Raidas, Ravidas, Ghasidas, another sect who are again excluded, but yes, their contributions were significant. So that when you look at, I think Bhima Bhoi can be put into that perspective also, because he used this bhakti as a means of transforming himself and transcending his liabilities, his limitations for a transference of knowledge. So, in that sense, understanding Bhima Bhoi and putting together the Bhima Bhoi's contributions provides a very nice canvas to work upon. Now, you would say to me that why, how do you look at this? Because when you think of Sanskritic and non-Sanskritic tradition, for example, then you will find that the primarily many of our religious traditions where or how come through the Sanskritic text. So we have a Vedas as first time history. But if you understand Vedas, then we'll also find in the great Hindu traditions there are not just Vedas, but there are also Upanishadic traditions. And Upanishads, as I think, were much uh, more critical than the Vedas acceptance. For example, when you look at Guru, now what is Bhima Bhoi? You find he is completely surrendering himself to Guru. But here, what is happening? That is saying, Upanishads are questioning that no, Guru is not that. If you follow the Guru only, what you will find? That you will become finding yourself like a frog in the well. You become what is called Sanskrit is Kupamanduka. Because you think the world is known because Guru. Guru may be known everything, but Guru has its limitation. That is what Upanishadic traditions are contesting with the Vedic traditions. But even if you look at Sanskritic text, so what you find, for example, the greatest one in Bhagavad Gita. So you talk about what are the means, what are the ways through which human can transcend this life and go for a better life and next life. Get out from the chakra of birth and rebirth to get a salvation, to get mukti, to get moksha. And there are the said chari bhakti madhi, the four bhaktis are there. So what is there in like yoga, jnana yoga, you find karma yoga, bhakti marga. So so they find and prema. So you find bhakti is one mechanism. But if you study Bhima Bhoi though is transcended bhakti, but here another mark is a dhyana. So Bhima Bhoi had also talked about the mark is a dhyana, meditation. And that is why I find strong consonance between Aravinda's concept of meditations and Bhima Bhoi's concept of dhyana. And dhyana marga has always been a very strong or important part of Indian philosophical tradition. So that because why? Because bringing the mind into constance and going beyond the ethereal world is a tremendous possibility that gives the nascent human mind to understand the infinity. So therefore, the concept of now when I discussing these things, then I found what is Bhima Bhoi, because as what as scholar as critic there are different dimensions. If you look at his biographical sketch, so Bhima Bhoi has a very short lifespan because he was born something around 1850 and died certainly by 1895. So in 40-45 years of time, and his lifetime was not very much to influence much. But even in those short times, and in childhood which was spent with utter poverty and penury, has led to him. And some people said that not only he was a tribal, but he's also the blind. Sometimes that is called, but we call him as a Santa Kavi. That is why the tradition will call complementary, something like as we look at poet saints. So Bhima Bhoi begins a tradition of a poet saint in India. Like you have the whether it is Tulsidas, whether it is Kabir, whether it is Ananta. He was a poet and he was a saint. But even it's coming from a very what is called unprivileged structure, and his elevation himself to the cult, where you find him as today as one of pantheons of Mahima Dharma, and is also a journey, and a journey need to be accepted, need to be respected, and need to be celebrated. And that is what why I want to share with you today. The first the line back which was expressed by Ananta Bhai when he said his lines, which talk about three major work. One is like Stuti Chintamani, which we line we talk about. Then there is talk about three types of Gitas also. And if you look at and his Gitas are different because he used name only Gita, but it's Nirguna, but he's talking, and he's called Brahma Nirpana Gita. Then he's Asteleka, Bihari Gita. So Astika Bihari Gita. So his contributions were diverse. And he's not only kept himself, but what attracts him, because he also need to understand there was before him also, there was a tradition in India, there was a tradition in Odisha particularly, where attempt has been made to what I call now paralyze the language, what I call the paralyze the tradition. I will discuss that briefly when I want to deal with these ideas and understanding, you know, uh, uh, you know, these ideas of understanding and examining it. So what he's trying to tell us now, first and foremost, because people like Jagannath Das, people like Balram Das, and much before him, Sarala Das, they are people who are trying to give two things. Number one, they want to bring transcending the cult of bhakti to all and sundry, and they were trying to break the shackles of Sanskritic tradition, which eclipsed the path where others like Sudraj and women could come to the path of religiosity. And this simplifying the code of language, like Gautam Buddha did, because Gautam Buddha used to speak, talk about the language of Prakrit instead of Sanskrit. And that is why you find Pali and Brahmi and Kharosthi. But because Sanskrit was by then time was not spoken by the majority, it was there are marginalized. So similarly, Bhima Bhoi and others, we took up the task of writing them and writing those texts in their own language, in Odia language, so that it could be studied, understood, explained, and spoken by ordinary people. So that is why it was, in that sense, if you look at it, it was an attack on Brahminism, it was an attack on ritualism, it was an attack on the ostracization of others from accepting from the path of God, from the path of truth. So that is why he's become a social reformer in that sense. So and that is that then talking about this the language is said, but what was his lifestyle was, which was as from young boy, where he was tending cattle, where he was blind, where he was in a poverty-stricken family, and these are not certain things which would ordinarily the things which will ordinarily restrict people, but it was not something which debilitated him. In fact, he found the path of salvation, the path of enlightenment through his own problems, through his own torture, and he find a means to go beyond than that. And that is why he is also talking about not of one person. And what is, even though he was searching for what I call now individual salvation, but he's also collective bhakti. So there you find a rare combination of individualistic approach and collective bhakti. And what he was trying to tell in the line that Ananta Bhai said, no, ପ୍ରାଣୀଙ୍କ ଆରତ ଦୁଃଖ ଅପ୍ରମିତ ଦେଖୁ ଦେଖୁ କେବା ସହୁ ମୋ ଜୀବନ ପଛେ ନର୍କେ ପଡ଼ିଥାଉ ଜଗତ ଉଦ୍ଧାର ହେଉ. He's saying the torture, the problems that I see, the tragedies of people, their dismemberment of feelings, their pain, their anguish, their suffering, I see them. And what I think, not only as he said, he can extend to all prani, but let me only confine here to human beings. So what is bringing the human beings? He's saying what? That praninko arato adukho pramito. This, the pain, suffering, and anguish of the humanity, if I say, is enough, is no uncountable. This uncountable tragedy. And then what he is saying, dekhu dekhu kebaso, whether you see it, whether you bear it. No, that is why transcending. Not only just it is inflicting the pain on you, but even if you see the suffering, the pain on others, both way. You must have the compassion to bear the pain of others as well. No, you have been kind enough to see and suffer the pain others are suffering by seeing their suffering. So in that sense, dekhu dekhu ke vasahu. But if it is happening, who is creating it? Again, he has bringing dichotomy. Is God is a creator of it? God is a taker of it also. But then he said, if God has taken this pain, because in the end, he believes every individual has to, do his duty, has to get his share of pain and anguish, pain and conflict. Now, it is in fact he said that if you look at his writings, there are two types of these scenes come through. One you can, which you have get it from the prarabdha karma, because you have from your past birth, which in fact, in a modern sense, Christianity called the original sin, because you are born as a human being, that is kept through. So similarly, but at the higher level, they said it is the sin that which has left in the past birth come to you, that you have inherited. Secondly, this is sin which you are doing now, your actions. So previous actions, you have to take a task of cleaning your past and also cleaning your present. So if you have to do both, cleaning the past path, what you have inherited from previous birth, and cleaning the present one, will take you to the path of salvation. So that is why, and he is thinking of term what? So he said, asking as a God, if a person has to suffer, then can I be the one? Can I take away their suffering and let me bear their suffering on behalf of them, so that they can go for the path of redemption? That is his ultimate sacrifice of an individual. He said, let my life be condemned in the hell. But what will happen? The universe, the world, must find redemption. So he is sacrificing himself individually and asking for what? Asking for the collective happiness. That is the beauty of Bhima Bhoi. That is the beauty of his writing. That I am not concerned about. And in contrast to contemporary notion of individualism, here you find a poet saint of 1850 talking about the collective suffering and sacrificing the self for the collectivity. And that is what he is talking about. And he also, when they do that, what also happened? Because Bhima Bhoi interestingly has a brought, as I said, from the moving away from bhakti, because I think there are so many things to explain. I do not know, time may not permit me to deal with all. But what I must tell you, that coming Bhima Bhoi being from the tribal family, tribal life called Kondha. So he has also brought the Kondha dimension of it, philosophy, because his philosophy, he was influenced primarily because as you become part of the society. So he understood the Kondha dimension, which considered the sky and the earth as example of God for them. And that is why he is understanding. And then later Bhima Bhoi talk about the Shunya, because the Shunya, the emptiness, which is also he considered part of in Buddhist theory, Buddhist philosophy. Said nothing. And in the Mahima Dharma, that he was his guru, they're talking about. And interestingly, as a juxtaposition of tradition, juxtaposition of Hindu philosophical tradition of Trinity, the Brahma, Vishnu, Maheshwar, as not important there. In their line of thinking, because if we look evolution of monotheism and so, he talk about, he is go beyond the monotheism. And she talk about what? She talk about, you are not finding the contemporary religions, the traditions. She said, all are Vedas, Upanishads, Shastras, Puranas. They are all trying to do what? Trying to find the Brahma, trying to find the truth. That is why in Sanskrit they say, Ekasada Brahma Bahuda Vadanti. The Brahma is one. And they say, Aham Brahmasmi, Mehi Brahma. Adi Shankaracharya is saying that Brahma is one. One Brahma. But here talking about, everybody was trying to find Brahma. The Brahma Satta, but where is it? He said, all the literature have failed to do so. Because Brahma is not here. Brahma is Nirakar. There is no, and it is Nirguna. It is Guna Vihin. It is Nirakar. It is not safe. It is a safe place. And where the safe place? In the safe place is his entity, is in, and his cosmology, because it is his cosmology. And his cosmology says there were no gods, there are no earth, there is no sky, there is no color. That is why I said, Nathila Tahire, Bedara, Vikara, Nathile Surja, Chandra, Nirakaro. Nathila Agni, Nathila Jala. There was no earth, there is no fire, there is no water, there is no sky, but there was a complete emptiness, complete shunya. And from that is why they call alek. इसको लेख नहीं सकते. What you cannot write, that is alek, niranjan. And that is why dharma is called alek niranjan, because it is niranjan, complete. So it can be, you cannot define it, indescribable, unwritten, unwrittenable. So that was his idea of cosmology. From Sunya there came the sky, from sky there come from the Surya and so on, from the sun there came the color. So he has a cosmology of it is, and he said it is the infinity of that. So therefore, since God is infinity, Brahma is infinity, that is to find it out is wrong. But then what is the option? How to do that? He said you don't do. That is why he was against adultery. Some thought of it, because many times if you look at it in traditional Veda, they were also talk about this absence of a nirakar, absence of a sakar. They thought God is formless. It is only because they latter things say only because our mind is finite and we cannot hold infinity in it. Therefore, we need to find sometimes what is sometimes like we call a personification of God, a anthropomorphization of God. So similarly, we find idol as a form. But all religions essentially do that. But Bhima Bhoi's thinking was beyond that. He talked about not. And his emphasis was that if you want to make your past karma and present karma good, better, and look for a salvation, then you need to go in the path of truth. So you are pointed to truth, and this truth must be reflected in the lifestyle you would lead to. And that is why, like Gautam Buddha said, Ashtanga Marga, Sat Karma, Sat Chinta, think of Buddhism. And on same line, he said, what is your task to be? His prescription for the better life meant is, that is why he said he was personally very, very anguished, deeply sorrowed, deeply pathological, because he said, what is happening to this world? Why there is so much individualism? Why there is so much conflict for resources? Why people are so untruth? Why there is a revenge? Why there is a vengeance? And he was concerned about that. And he himself suffered that also. Because when he started questioning the foundations of Brahminical ritualism, the foundation of existing a system of universe, so naturally he in fact angered the upper caste who are dominant, and they made many attempts on him and rebuking him, ridiculing him, and therefore he will say, "Gali garbathasa apamanakumu galare karichi malo." This gali, this rebuke, this upahas, this is called jokes people are making on me, making me laughing stuff. These are not bad. These I have made them my garlands. I don't being enthroned by them. But people did that, including attempt on his life. But he never stopped from that. He said these are, and always in times or such difficult times, personal tragedies, he asked his guru that and Bhima, that is, please, you be with me. You give me the shelter. I want to be there. So that is at the personal level. He was not is somebody who was running away from the risk. There was a risk of his life, but he said, my path is of devotion. That is why he said dhyana, but not only meditation, but also with your karma. So he bringing both karma yoga and dhyana yoga. Dhyana, if I said more, it's a jnana yoga. He bringing both the jnana and karma together. So and then I think personally what is important to understand, that is some people say writings are there, Bhima Bhoi is blind, he was illiterate, maybe. But if I look at his literature, look at the type of poems he has sung or written, one may be mesmerized that one cannot write such beautiful language, beautiful style without any education. But that's the beauty of him. That also says for us what? This also says the knowledge is not actually limited to the schools. Today we think any our knowledge education is in the schools. And his education was knowledge and what I call not mere education knowledge, but it was wisdom. And it was his wisdom that lies in him. And this wisdom is get from the life experiences, from the things you learn from the life, from the things you learn from the nature. And that is also a biggest critic. If you have somebody like Paulo Freire, you would talk about pedagogy the oppressed. No, I don't talk about oppressed as a different pedagogy. But what I think, in fact, this pedagogy is a lies in the lifetime, in the life events. So in a sense, our life world and worldview, because our worldview comes from on the life world, and this life world is become a center of knowledge. And he, even though he was blind or otherwise, but he had, he said, his inner blindness, outer blindness, it never became an inhibition for his inner knowledge. So inner peace and inner knowledge. So therefore, he talked about that is his understanding that you have to do a good karma, do a good deeds. That will be redemption. And that lead about a course, interestingly said, of non-violence, of compassion, of care. So if non-violence, compassion, and care are founding pillars of its understanding, and then it also is not somebody else. And that is why when I study sometimes, he said his lifestyle means what? As an ascetic. So this asceticism is also part of it. Because living like a mendicant, living like an ascetic. So it's asceticism. Nirasakta bhava. No, he's not asakti. So when you don't have that nirasakta, asceticism, and that allows you to transcend the materialistic life of the present one. So therefore, you find a juxtaposition, what I call it a binary opposition. If I can use a Levi-Straussian theory, if you can use a Levi-Straussian theory to think in terms of what when Levi-Strauss used in his what is proper on structural anthropology, where he talks about a binary opposition. You like good and bad as binary oppositions. So his binaries were there, and then if you look at this binary in the Kaspoli, and the binary opposition, what they call from structural linguistic Lang and Parole, this language is an important thing. And this language of traditional of philosophy and religious practices, where the language of upper class, where language are inscrutable. So he tries to bring them into what? Bring them into poetic form. And you must know that when the prosaic, when the prose, when the contested prose, or when the syntax and semantics of grammar, syntax and semantics of language confines it to a sense of non-understanding, we brush down, give them the breathing place of flowing language in a simple style, in a lyrical style. So the lyricism, the poetry has a capacity to appeal to all, whether women, children, or old, who are bereft of that, that is what is called traditional contested structural linguistics of the philosophy. So bringing them from that, he contested those with a prose, with a poetry, and went on, and not giving what is called now today we go for the discourse. So he was not somebody who was giving discourse. He was somebody who was linking his life, what I call, and his experiences were enriched the living in world, the lived world where he was. And therefore, what Mackie Marriott would call, there was not an universalization of it, but there is a parochialization. So he was taking these parochial thinkings, put into universal dimensions, and probably giving much more relativity. And in that sense, also, he was the one who talked about equality. And equality, as Ananta was saying, not only human beings, but also even other forms of animals. That would maybe second discourse. But if you think of equality, so it is Bhima Bhoi's conceptions that no, he is saying praninka dukha, not in individual, not in the rich and poor, not in the male and female, child, age or old. He is only asking to the everyone. And he talk about God has not created anyone different from others. So that notions of equality. And he also wanted what is called, he was anguished by the lack of personal moral values, ethics. So he was trying to create a moral values, ethical code of a personal honesty. That is what he's talking about. Personal honesty and ethical norms, which could form. And then his contestation was also against the superstition. And that is why against the superstition and blind beliefs of the then society, he tried to bring them out of that morass of superstitions, and 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 blind beliefs, because traditional society, tribal society was concerned with those many of such superstitions, and he was even at those point of time he was making an efforts of bringing them that to, from the morass of it, and trying to find a solace in a supernatural beauty. But that supernatural, it's even because it is, when we say it is emptiness, when you don't give it a shape, it means everybody has a capacity to bring it in. Like our like sky is shapeless, like sometimes you look at the horizon is shapeless, and look at the ocean is shapeless. So when you think shapeless, you have two experiences. One experience of your humbleness, one experience of insignificance, one experience of our limitedness, but you also capacity to observe from them. So therefore, by taking the God out of the temples, taking the God out of this, the souls of the God from the idols, and putting them in a transverse, putting them in a larger, bigger canvas, he has tried to bring people from the fold of the morass of their disillusionment, their personal predicaments, from their declining personal values and honesty, to a path of self realization, to a path of an understanding, to a path of loving each other. So, love, compassion, kindness are the ingredients of the Bhima Bhoi's personality, ingredients of Bhima Bhoi's writings. And that is why that is he says. Now, the language I say there are many times, Kahe Bhima Bhoi Brahma Sapadi Jali Diya Mopindaku. He's saying, hey, oh God, if you think the world is created, I, on behalf of them, ask you, no, bring all their sin to me and use your power to make me turn my soul into ashes. But please forgive them. So that forgiveness, that kindness, that compassion for his fellow travelers, irrespective of what the world has treated him. So that is how, if some person has gained such appearance, he is nothing more than a saint, more than a God. No, that is the saintness, that is his kindness, what he talk about, in sin. So his other, the textual dhan bhakti, that what he talk about, in his Astika Bihari Gita, and so these are explanations and writings that one you need to learn, and that is why I said his proficiency in local traditions, bringing them together, and creating a new cosmos and new understanding, was certain something, that's something that we need to appreciate and we need to realize. And that is why Bhima Bhoi, even if you will link one of his poems, which I will quote, it's called Satyare Maribi Satyare Taribi. No, and always he wants like a child that, please, whatever happens, God, please don't leave me. Like a young child doesn't want to leave the anchor of our mother. So similarly, he thinks, here God, whatever I do, please don't leave me. I am not blind, I am blind otherwise, but your presence only gives me faith, gives me courage, and gives me the capacity to think. So he says, don't leave me. And what is that? That is truth. He said, Satyare Maribi, Satyare Taribi. If I have to say, it has to be truth. So such inspiring understanding, and is such uncompromising attitudes to uphold the value of truth, of personal honesty, and championing causes for the sufferings, and showing that compassionate for them, is something that distinguished Mumbai from his other saint philosophers, because he remained born local, remained local, and died local. So that is what I wanted to share it. And therefore, to conclude, what I would say, I think I maybe some few minutes, one more minute. So if I want to conclude, I will say, when we talk about Bhima, in a different language, in Odia, they would say, there's in Gopabandhu writes for others, and I quote him, one of another poet, a social reformer and a great compassionate human being, Gopabandhu writes, and I quote, he said, Manisha Jivana Nuhoi Kebala Varsha Masa Dina Danda Karme Jenara Karma Ekatara Jivanara Mana Danda. Translated in English, it said, the life of human being is not about seconds, minutes, hours, and years. The life of a man must be compared, must be engaged, must be taught, valued and measured in terms of his work, in terms of his work ethics. So man lives and dies by the work he does. And the work that Bhima Bhoi did in such span of his life has a tremendous success. And I'm happy that even if belatedly the government of Odisha recognized that, had a chair professorship in some in Gangadhar Mere University in Sambalpur to have a discussion on Bhima Bhoi's writings, and asked one of the former IAS anthropologist Siddhakan Mahapatra to write a book by Sahitya Academy. So even they relate that, and you will be happy to note that even UN House has the inscriptions of Bhima Bhoi's lines. So it is the sometimes it feels that God do not come elsewhere. God, if he has to become anthropomorphic form, then these are the people who are anthropomorphic form of God. So Bhima Bhoi, I don't want to make a compare God or so, but the godliness, if God is humanness, is humanity, and the godliness is divinity. So he was also a divinity incarnated. And I am sure in today's times, in turbulent times, where there is a violence, conflict, lack of compassion, individualism, consumerism, and the reluctance to live things, Bhima Bhoi's asceticism, Bhima Bhoi's kindness, Bhima Bhoi's compassion, Bhima Bhoi's alignment with poetry, his romanticism with God, is provides a beacon of light. And by remembering him, remembering his thought, I think, and making me being part of this by giving a platform, I think Randhir and the company has done a wonderful job, a human service to remembering his to humanity. So of course we cannot change much by thought, but yes, our consciousness and thought and action put together will certainly bring a change to the world. And if a minimalist he can bring it, then that will make our lecture, our understanding today is a very, very happy evening. So with
Thank you.
this some words, I take leave, and I now hand it over to Randhir to say thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir, for an excellent deliberation. And your lecture is really full of historical, sociological, and philosophical insights. And the way you articulate, it really invites us to understand Bhima Bhai so deeply, because you have touched, almost all dimension of his life. And it really, being a sociologist, I can find, many important sociological, conceptual category which we need to explore when we read the work of Bhima Bhoi, for that matter. So now it's time to invite our discussant, Minati Pradhanji. You are invited to kindly share your views.
Thoughts. Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Good evening, everyone. Uh, I thank Professor Anant Kumar Giri and Professor Randhir Kumar Gautam for giving me this opportunity to discuss about Bhima Bhoi. I am not no expert. Let me confess, I am no expert in any matter. Just out of interest, few things I have learned. And I thank first Professor Tapan Kumar Mohanty for his excellent deliberation and touching all the sides of Bhima Bhoi's philosophy and his works. So I just want to, when Ananta Bhai was telling no about my personal experiences, what I last time I said, that is how actually I first got introduced to that Sant Kavi Bhima Bhoi. When I heard the versions, and it has got some different types of lyrics, which was probably very difficult for my tender mind to understand. And I asked my grandfather to explain what does it mean, all these things it mean. So when he explained this is what it means, so probably that provoked my my curiosity to know more about it. And later on only I came to know about that Mahima Dharma, and that people dress a particular way and what they do. So now Ananta Bhai was telling, that how in the contemporary scenario, how from the Arat to Anand we can transform to. That is obviously poetry, love, philosophy, and compassion. All these things were very much were present in with the Bhima Bhoi's version that time, when it is means 100 years, 120 years back, with his version. No, is one is still now also, before some time also, so where Bhagavad Tungi, there was in villages where there will be a small place where people will listen to the sacred text, and evening they will spend that versions and all. That time there was no entertainment. Probably those versions were sung so much there, because with that one is actually transported to the spiritual realm, where the void and eternity, blend with the small environment of the time and space. So people could relate to his, the way he has explained his misfortune and tragedy, all these things. So people used to relate to those things. So that is how it has got very popular. It is no very high language of the Odia lyrics. It is very simple to understand, and it has got a, of course, it has got a deeper meaning, but it is very simple to understand. When the Professor Mohanty was telling, literature is reflection of the society. Of course it is. But another thing also, literature is also a personal experience. When you read the Stuti Chintamani, from that many verses, he has explained his childhood trauma. I mean, how his life was, means he has spent his life, and how he has come up with, he has transformed his tragedy into the bliss. Like whatever, no, by writing, he was, it is many scholars actually argue he was not blind from the beginning. Later on, with his smallpox and all, he got blinded. I mean, he was blind that time. Then whatever was coming to his mind, other disciples and all, they used to write that. So that you can think from the tragedy to bliss, how he transformed himself. So that was, and he was there telling, in his poetry, we find there are so many similarities of the medieval Bhakti Yoga, like Professor Mohanty was telling, like Mirabai, then Tulsidas, Chaitanya, all these things. But there is one more thing, that is no, that Sunyavad. That is actually, I find it is a bit contradictory. Like Shunyavad, there is a divine principle, and it is against idol worship, and nothing is there. In that, once somebody asked Mata Amritanandamayi Devi, what is your opinion about the idol worship? So she said, it is like a nursery child. You have to first show the picture, then only they will concentrate. I mean, that is mango or that is something. Later on, when you speak about mango or you speak about a tree, that picture will automatically come to your mind and you will know it. So in that context, the level of spiritualism was very high. I mean, no, without anything, when you will concentrate on Sunya or Sunya Bada, where there is no shape, it was, they say that's Param Brahma and Ishwara Purusham, and the concept of Alek, the indescribable, and Nirguna, without any attributes, Nirakara, formless, and the Anadi, which is eternal. These are very high level spiritual things, like Niranjana, which is very pure. And the Mohima Dharma actually, it is about the radiance and glory. Once when somebody just completes the, what to say, the worldly things, then probably you transcend into the next level of spiritualism. So these are the things I have observed from his things. And that as a social reformer, actually he has always opposed that higher class and the rich and upper class, so domination and the idol worship, the ritualism. So Mohima Dharma is actually condemnation of all this, no, that religious customs, which is set by the rich upper class society and other things. So that is why the ultimate is the supreme soul, who is formless and omnipresent, which is called Alek. It has been it is because a powerful force of liberation in India at that time. If you take it like 1890, 1890s, that time. So it has been, I know many people, there is no caste system, there is no Brahminical dominations. So that is why many followers were there for him to follow that. And probably because of their strict rules, I mean, one good thing is there that they don't, they forbid that adultery, that intoxicants, then flesh, violence, then food before sunset and getting up early. I mean, you can say the way of life. That is very good one way. And the second way, probably it did not appeal to the general people that who were so much used to this, our Hindu customs and religions. So probably that did not gain that much popularity. And Professor Mohanty was telling about the tribal poet. I mean, that is why last time I said, normally people always used to categorize. You are the Dalit poet, the tribal poet, the women's poet, the women's writer. So that is what I was telling. Can we see beyond the caste, him as a saint poet, or as a the contribution towards the Odia literature and Odia Bhakti movement and all these things, whether we can look towards that. And obvious, like any Mahayana Buddhism and all, moksha also was another component of their Alekh Dharma. So they also know all these Mahima Dharma, the people who were following those things, they were in utter poverty. They only constant movement from one place to another place, which I find it is also again contradictory. Like as a only few sect of people can do that, not everyone. They're not allowed to sleep in one place in one night. Only you can spend. You cannot spend 2 nights in one place, and you cannot take food twice from a same house. So that may not appeal with the general masses. But what I find is very ironical is even though those things were was another level of spiritualism, still some Hindu ritualistic things are there. Like last time I was telling, the females are not allowed to their sanctuary sanctum. It is in Joronda where they worship the paduka, what you call that one, and the fire is a symbol of that alek. Like they think that fire doesn't have any form, the fire doesn't have any shape, and it is the all source of energy, and all these things. They don't allow people, like it is like some bad things has gone from Hindu religion. That's what I feel. So he actually has woven that his poetry into the philosophical and metaphysical ideas in simple and lyrical Odia poetry. Bhajans and bolis. Bolis means there is a typical things to Odia thing. Boli means there are two lines which will be rhyming with each other, and the two lines itself, it will be the idea will be completed and it can be conveyed through that. So these were my observations.
Thank
So
you.
I would like to thank Professor Anant Kumar Giri and Professor Randhir Kumar sir for giving me the opportunity to be as a discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the beautiful articulation of the work of Bhima Bhoi. And being a poet, you have different case, you have different perspective to see his thought, his legacy for that matter. Now it's time to invite our respected participant to kindly share his or her view. So first I would like to invite Professor Gyan Gului.
Yes. Thank you very much. I'm audible.
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. It was really very, very interesting. I am meditating on the different points because very many points are new for me. Therefore, I need very much reflection in order to put the points into a mosaic, into a global vision. Well, I am at first I would say I am very interested in the problem of which is posed anyway in the reflection of the points of the experts of Mahima Dharma about the opposition between being and becoming, because I see in the poetry of Bhima Bhoi, in his description, for instance, of the Brahman and of the Brahman which is defined as something described as something which is not this, because it is the being, it is therefore not to be identified with appearances and therefore with forms of becoming. I see this. I believe. I think that there is this strong influence of the Mahima Dharma in the opposition and differentiation between what is being on the one hand, to which we have to make a comeback, a return, and an essence, and on the other side, the forms of becoming and becomings, of course, of which are that which, in a certain sense, distracts our attention from this return, from this coming back to the being, and this apprehension of being, on the one hand. On the other hand, I see that the description which Bhima Bhoi makes of Brahman as such, which is a description through a description of all what Brahman is not, because I see very many analogies, which are really amazing analogies, with the very beginning of the ancient Greek philosophy, and in particular with a philosopher, Parmenides, who is always making this distinction, that is, that we are fully immersed, so to speak, in the dimension of becoming and of the multiplicity of appearances, but that we have to make, so to speak, a return to the true and authentic dimension of being. And there are, so to speak, structural analogies, correspondences, which are really amazing. And I am, anyway, investigating whether it can be made, that it can be further explored, the question of possible relationship between ancient Greek philosophy, the very beginning of ancient Greek philosophy on the one hand, and the tradition which leads to the speculation, the meditation of Mahima Dharma, whether there are common relationships, mutual relationships, or whether the two traditions take something from a pre-existing tradition, for instance, the Indo-Aryans cultural tradition, because this is really very interesting. I would say perhaps rather more for the interpretation of authors of the ancient Greek philosophy like Plato and Parmenides than perhaps for the interpretation of the Indian cultural heritage. But I think that anyway, independently of the relationship with ancient Greek religion, I think that the interpretation of Bhima Bhoi in his poetry of Brahman, of being, and is so to speak, meditation on the way in which we can go far from the dimension of the multiplicity of becoming in order to come back to the being. It is as such independently of everything, really very interesting. And well, I would like I will try for sure to go deeper through this aspect of Bhima Bhoi, and of course of the meditation which is contained in Mahima Dharma. I thank you very much. Thank you. It was really wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gyanguli, as always. You always ask very deep question, and so with this question also. So now I would like to invite Professor Meera Chakravarti, Madam, to kindly share her view.
Thank you, Randhir, and thank you, Ananta. Thank you, Professor Mohanty. You referred to the subaltern dimension that, of course, is naturally quite obvious in the. I'm not a Oriya literature student, but I am a doctoral advisor in cultural studies. And I'm really pleased to see the tribal person, the saint who has come up to that. And Janvi's comment on to from being to become, from becoming to being, is equally very important. What I disturbing a little bit, which I find here, is that there is a mention of a ritual which the people go to. I don't know whether the saint himself was involved. Go to the Jagannath temple and removing the idol, and then throwing them. And when this incident is very disturbing, because one, it might try to indicate a kind of suggest a kind of religious absolutism, which I think is not at all. I suspect that is not there at all with, I think, with the saint. Maybe it is an isolated incident, but maybe if it is associated with his life stories, it will be disturbing, because that would send a wrong message. That is one thing. So when we tried, because the very bhakti movement, when you see, it's a responsibility of all these, and they have, you referred very well with Mirabai as coming out of the box and thinking, and coming out of the box, coming out of the system which was oppressive, and championing the freedom of course. So if this is, I mean, and she, of course, though she belongs to the royal family, I think she represents the royal family. No, she represents a saint, a trend, bhakti with responsibility. So this incident of in the Jagannath temple would also undermine the responsible behavior of a community, because Ramakrishna Paramahamsa said that Jatamat Tatapat, whether you are supposed to, you're bound to, it's imperative that we respect each other's cultural, linguistic dimensions, or creed, religion, etc. So I would rather ask whether this is really what has happened, because when subaltern speaks, so as the Spivak and the subaltern group have tried to mention, they need not speak with violence. That's all. If they speak, they speak, because bhakti is also, from the aesthetic point of view, an artistic movement. You have so much of aesthetics in bhakti movement as well. So this is my dilemma. I thought, since you are in the Odia literature, and I am devoid of the wealth of Odia literature because I don't know the Odia language, so you can kindly throw light on that. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much, madam. Thank you so much, madam, for asking such a good question. So I request Professor Tapan Mohanty sir to kindly note down these questions. We have two more person whom I like to invite. Nalin Bhai, Nalin Mohanty, or Sandhya Rani Giri. You can ask your question in Odia language. Perhaps he is taking some time. So, Dr. Tiwari. Okay, he is taking some time. So, Professor Mohanty sir, please.
I think while I will discuss, meanwhile they can rejoin actually.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and I think Professor Gyanwig's comment was very pertinent, because she was asking about this juxtaposition between the Brahminic sect and this Mahima sect, and the capacity of religious contestation. But yes, I agree with him, because like many other religious beliefs and thought, Bhima Bhoi was one who insisted on the transformation of human being from being to becoming. And that is why I would say a person born with sin, whether it is inherited from the previous birth or his own predicament in this world, this birth, both need redemption. And that is why his idea of the what is called now as Suddhi, otherwise called purification. So he wanted to purification of the soul. And the purification of soul is possible by the methods of meditation and by the methods of austerity and asceticism. And that is why he believed that that is what this humanism is all about. It is you are taking birth in a human form. The form is not important. If I juxtapose it, it's about the content, and the content has a transformative potential and value because it has the ability to transform itself. That is there is a journey from being to becoming. So he said one can become a better individual, redeems himself. So it is not, as you say, somebody like Calvinism, where he said your fate is predetermined or predestined. It is not like Calvinism. He would believe there is the possibility of redemption in this world, in this body, only through the work. So he has an idea of the good work and meditation to do it. So that is why he talk about one has to make himself bereft of the anger, the violence, the consumption, and so on and so forth. That's what I wanted to say, and that also interestingly links me with Professor Mira Chakraborty's question, because what she has said is actually mentioned in many of the text, but details are not much available in the sense there was a conflict between the practitioners of Mahima Dharma, whom they call as Kumbhapetia in a local language, and some of them, and 14 of them, actually went to the Jagannath temple. Because in fact there are two type of saying. One says they went to the Jagannath temple with the prasad when Lord Jagannath was giving the prasad for them, for himself. And this is something that there is a conflict between the pandas, who are the priests there in Jagannath temple, and this Kumbhapetuas, the Mahimas. And one person was lost his life in the melee, and this prasad was what is called spoiled. So that was one. The second story says that actually the king of Puri, Gajapati, wanted to honor Bhima Bhoi, and Bhima Bhoi and his followers went there for meeting. But when this thing happened, Bhima Bhoi actually lost repentance, and he came back. And therefore, on some of his writings, he said that practicing of non-violence, and as Madam Chakrabarti was saying, yes, in bhakti, the essence of bhakti is tolerance. The essence of bhakti is benevolence. The essence of bhakti is compassion. The essence of bhakti is non-violence. And these are the essential values and virtues the saint himself has said. So I think that incident has happened because even the other thing that could contradict that saint himself was present, the fact that when his guru was expired, or what is called, we call in the got his guru got the salvation. There was a meeting in Joranda, the place, uh, to decide that how to go forward and what to do, and the saint participated there. But there he detached himself. He said this type of materialistic things, this types of ritualistic things, I am not part of. I am only here to pray and bring that consciousness in human mind through my work. I am not concerned who will decide, who will be there, what is the territory, and all these things. I am not concerned. I am more concerned with the spiritual evolution of than materialistic one. So that means the saint himself was not part. But the broader concept is that since the Mahima Dharma did not believe in adultery, and they believe a large part of Hindu superstition is the result of the adultery, and the biggest idol is Lord Jagannath, and by destruction or desecration of that would actually bring that. This is of course a narrow mindedness, because you sometimes it happens that you do not have control over your followers who are one-sided, and I am sure that the saint himself was not part and parcel to it. It was events which actually simultaneously in the same period, but there is no direct involvement of saint is found either in the gazetteers or the records of things, or the newspapers. So there have been these discussions thereon, but yes, as Madam says, the bhakti itself doesn't mean a contestation. It can be a contestation at the level of spiritualism, because debate, dialogue, discourse are part of our great tradition, and it was not a tradition of violence, vengeance, and anything. So that would have been a collective failure, because of that incident deeply saddened him, and probably that was also a result of his early death, maybe to some extent, though I am not sure about it. But this is an incident. This is an unfortunate incident in that part of history. So thank you, ma'am, for bringing that to me. Of course, it is nothing to do with the language. Yes, language, being speaking the same language, an advantage. But yes, as I said, these are of course documented evidences, and there are English translations are available. But yes, that I hope I had answered both your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. But these bhajans are available in English so that we can get it. I'm not. I do not know whether they are
No,
translated.
yes, translated versions are there. Sitakan Mahapatra has translated some versions in English. I can share that text. I think I had downloaded it, so it can be shared with you.
Oh, please.
Yeah.
Surely. Thank you so much.
Ma'am, Meera ma'am, you can listen to Odia versions and obviously you will understand also, I believe.
Yes, you can.
No, I wanted to read them. If I read them, I have to read it through translation.
The translation.
I have one question.
Yes.
I have one query actually to Professor Mohanty. Can I ask?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. Actually, we some texts and some articles refer that he was for the women's education and things like that. But some scholars also argue that even though he had in his ashram he had some spiritual concert 3, 2 or 3, 4, and it seemed that he was never influenced by those words. That means those things. So, can you put some light on that? It is not very clear how it was.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Benati, for putting that question. Yes, when I was going through some literature, I found that one of his concert, Anandamai, his mother, was like it was what I can find a closest companion. That description is like Vivekananda has sister Nivedita, or Sri Aurobindo has Sima. So she was a spiritual concert, and some people say there are 4. But again, as there is nothing much documented their exact role. But maybe because since she was staying in a ashram, and there are of course because I think the reason for that, many of the Brahmins at that time made a complaint. In fact, there was a complaint against Bhima Bhoi to the then governor of Odisha, and that was T.E. Revenshaw. And on his name, the Revenshaw College is there. So there was a letter by one of the Pandit Brahmin to T. Revenshaw that Bhima Bhoi is spoiling the upper caste women by calling them to the ashram and having discourse at night and so. And then I'm talking about the bhakti, and talking about non-idol worship, and contesting about religious traditions, etc., etc. So what is now in in legal language, you can say that he's violating the peace of the place. That letter, of course, there is no further. I do not find there was any case registered, like Kumar case. So there is no case registered or no other recommendation, but there is the only documentation that there was, and probably this is what prompted Bhima Bhoi to save himself from these unfair accusations to have women in the ashram, and that is also secondly, it also meant that it was not purely a patriarchal one. So by bringing women into the cult, unlike Gautam Buddha, who prescribed largely though to have women in the sangha, but he was one person who allowed women to even with sanctuarium and even to participate and openly discuss, and then of course solve doubts and the thing. So I am not much about these briefs. I don't know much about their roles because there is not much documentation I can find. But it's a pertinent point, and maybe somebody can do research on that. But I have only this much knowledge on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we are running out of the time, so it's time to invite Dr. Devendra Kumar Tiwari from Lovely Professional University. Sir, if you have any question, then you can share your concern and
Sir, question come observation I have.
oh,
And
please
first of
share.
all, I would like to express my thanks to Professor Tapan Mohanty sir for his brilliant presentation. Although, like Meera Chakravarti ma'am, I was listening about Bhima Bhai for the first time, but from the brilliant presentation of Professor Tapan Mohanty sir, I could learn a lot. And on the basis of ideas projected by Professor Mohanty about the life and contribution of Bhima Bhoi, I can say that definitely, and through the presentation, uh, Professor Mohanty just pointed out the contribution of Meera Bai or Kabir or Surdas or Tulsi or Raidas or Gautam Buddha time and again. So definitely, although much there is a lot of research required to be done, but of course Bhima Bhai could be uh, put in the category of Surdas, Kabir Das and all, because I would like to say that the concept or the ideology which was pondered or given by Bhima Boy is very much similar to these seminal social reformers and poets. So, of course, he can be put in the category of these renowned persons. So, definitely, the seminar like that, where a lot of discussion happened about his contribution, his philosophy, definitely, and when some publication will be done on his contribution, of course he will be getting the desired privilege or position what he has. So right now I would like to only say ki like the concept of that Sunyavad or that concept of Nirgud Brahma, or means the concept of that sacrifice in utter belief about God, whatever uh, Bhima Bhai's boy's concept or notion was. Here, one couplet of Suradas I can remember in one of his offering to Lord Krishna. He says, ki, if you have belief in Krishna, means miracle can happen in form